Okay, I think we're ready to go. Yeah, 6:35. And yeah, thank you so much for joining us. Tonight's program is part of the Path Through History Weekend. New York's got a Path Through History Weekend every year, and there are tons of historic sites around the state that are highlighted during the Path Through History Weekend. The castle is one of them, and I may be a little biased, but I think in terms of history and architecture, it would be hard to beat our castle. This program, we actually did it once before, and I think it was back in January. Had an incredible turnout at that time. We actually exceeded the county limit on the Zoom participants. And so a lot of people said that they would like us to run it again, so because they didn't get a chance to see it before. So that's one of the reasons we're doing it tonight. Let me just get it started here. I should warn you, at any moment you may hear barking dogs in the background, but it's okay. We have 2 dogs here, and sometimes they can get a little loud. Okay, this is about the Castle on the Hill. It's a history and virtual tour of the New York State Asylum at Binghamton. Let me make a couple comments before we even start. You're going to get a lot of history here. You're going to see a lot of photos. In terms of the history, it's all been pieced together from, well, many sources, but that includes some original vintage documentation from some of the, well, from the founder, from the earliest directors. The Broome County Historical Society has just an incredible collection of vintage material associated with this building. So that's where a lot of the history was pieced together from. And the rest of it was from interviews. Over the years, gosh, I've been working on this for 18 years. And over that time, I've had the good fortune to meet a lot of former employees, a lot of current employees, and even families of former patients. So I was able to get a lot of good information and a lot of very poignant stories from that experience. Regarding the photos, those have been taken over many years. So some photos you'll see maybe some furniture in one of the rooms or some paintings on the wall. That has all been since removed. So keep in mind that these pictures span, gosh, probably 15 years in time. But right now, everything has been taken out of the building. There's nothing in there at all. All the photos have been taken with permission of the owner, and it's a very important point to make. One more thing, public access is not permitted to the building, and there are 3 pretty good reasons for that. One is it's located right in the center of an active health center campus, so there's concern about patient privacy. Another reason is it's hazardous, both inside and outside. In fact, that's the reason that the building is closed right now, is because some of the stonework on the facade collapsed back in 1993. And so it's hazardous in that respect. It's also, there are places on the inside where it's hazardous. So that's another reason for not allowing access. And then the third reason is that there's a lot of work going on as we speak. There are engineering studies being done, feasibility studies being done, and it's important that the interior be protected as much as possible while this work is going on. Anyway, it's a rare opportunity to see the inside of this building, and I hope everybody enjoys it. So let me get started here. Start off with a couple bullet points. 1858, construction began on a massive stone structure at the outskirts of Binghamton. With this building, its founder would pioneer medical addiction treatment in this country. Its designer would become one of New York State's leading 19th century architects. And for over a century, it would provide security, healthcare, and employment for thousands. Abandoned nearly 30 years ago, this National Historic Landmark awaits restoration and rebirth. So that pretty much sets the stage. And it all began as the New York State Inebriate Asylum. And that began with this man, Joseph Edward Turner. Back in the mid-1800s, Turner had a medical practice in New York City. And at that time, alcoholism was a real big problem in this country. People were starting to think that maybe alcoholism wasn't just a vice, maybe it was a medical condition. And if so, maybe it could be treated medically. So there was a whole school of thought that bought into that. And Turner was one of those. And he became a very ardent supporter of that philosophy. He did a lot of research. He traveled to Europe to see how the situation was handled over there. While he was there, he fell in love with the architecture. So yeah, he just became obsessed with the idea of building an inebriate asylum. So he, in fact, here's a quote from a book about Turner and the asylum. If there is a single person responsible for the birth of medically directed addiction treatment institutions in the United States, it is Joseph Edward Turner. And if there is one institution that best captures the triumphs and tragedies of 19th century addiction treatment, it's the very first of such institutions, the New York State Inebriate Asylum. So again, very first one in the country. There he is. It was in 1852 that he filed an application with the New York State Legislature to incorporate an inebriate asylum. 2 years later, they granted a charter for the asylum, and the only condition was that Turner would have to raise half the money himself. The estimated cost was $100,000. And I think the equivalent these days would be about $3 million, which even then, that doesn't seem like much. So it was going to cost $100,000. As soon as he came up with $50,000, they get the rest from the state and everything would be good to go. They didn't count on how driven this man was. Turner spent the next 4 years raising money for the asylum. And the way he did it was just traveling back and forth across the state, grabbing everybody he possibly could and selling them $10 subscriptions. So he'd go up to a minister or a doctor or anybody and say, okay, you give me $10, I'll give you this little slip of paper. And that $10 will go towards building the asylum. But if for any reason it doesn't happen, you can take this slip of paper and get your money back. So that's the way he raised $50,000. And yeah, we actually have a bunch of those certificates in the vault at the Historical Society. Now he needed a location to build it. He's raised his share of the money. Now he needs a place to build it. So he starts looking around the state. He liked the idea of Binghamton. One reason is because Binghamton liked the idea of having the asylum here, but also because it was centrally located. There's good service by the railroads. And it was a nice, pleasant, a beautiful area. He fell in love with it. So here's a page of Turner's diary from 1858. Let's see, April 13th, he visited several sites. The citizens of Binghamton had a meeting on the subject of a site for the asylum. Next day, rode around with a committee to look for a site. And the next day, met with the committee, and Daniel S. Dickinson presided. So things were starting to happen in Binghamton. Finally, on May 22nd, the village, it was a village at that time, provided 252 acres for the asylum. It was called the Lion Farm. And a perfect area right up on a hill on the outskirts of the town. And that's where it would be. The cool thing about this is, I mean, it was a huge, grand structure. And just about any place you would be in Binghamton, you could look up on the hill and see this thing. So now he's got a location, he's got the money, he needs an architect. Well, he knew an architect that was working near him in New York City at the time. His name was Isaac Perry. And here's what Turner later said about this. That Isaac Perry was working as a carpenter and a stair builder, had very little experience as an architect. And that's true. He got his start working with his father as a carpenter and a stair builder. So Turner says he drew up the dimensions and the styles. He knew exactly what he wanted. He basically drew it up, handed it off to Mr. Perry, and then Perry would develop the final plans. And Perry went on to relocate to Binghamton and actually supervise the construction of the building. But then he started designing other structures, a lot of them here in town, 4 churches, Broome County Courthouse, all sorts of beautiful grand buildings in town, including the cast iron Perry building. And then in later life, he went on to be the New York State architect. He designed over 40 armories around the state, and he was responsible for completing the New York State Capitol at Albany. And that all started with the castle here. Construction began in 1858. We continued for 8 years. He still hadn't gotten the state's half of the funding, but he was a driven man and he just moved forward. This is a lithograph of the laying of the cornerstone on September 24th, 1858. If you read accounts of it, it's everybody in this community showed up. It was a huge event. All those guys with ribbons and top hats, those are Masons. The Masons play a very big role in the construction of this building. And there he's one of the Masons is performing the ritual pouring of the oil and corn on the cornerstone. Inside that cornerstone was a time capsule, and we even have a list of everything that was in that capsule. And you'll notice there's an umbrella there under that guy's arm. That's a little hint. It was actually a torrential downpour that day. It just rained absolute cats and dogs all day. So it must have been pretty messy up there. And that's the artist's conception of what it would look like. By 1864, the north, it wasn't anywhere near done, but the north wing was complete enough to actually start receiving patients. And 15 patients were admitted. Here's a list of some of the first patients. I kind of pixeled out the last names, didn't really have to, but I thought it might be a good idea. And you get a good idea of the clientele there. It's a lot of people were from downstate. You see the ages, I don't know, it looks like an average of about 30 years old or so. All men, there were no women allowed. Occupation, treasurer, auctioneer, lawyer, conductor, insurance. Oh, and a few gentlemen. So you start getting the idea that a lot of the patients here were fairly well-to-do downstate residents. One of the patients was former mayor of Syracuse, and also the son, another one was the son of Harriet Beecher Stowe. All right, things started going downhill fast as soon as they opened, because Turner was installed as the director. And by the way, my virtual background here, that is Turner's office, the way it looks today, although without anything on the shelves. So Turner had a very harsh, he was a very harsh disciplinarian. He went by the book. He ruled, he was very stern director. And the patients resented that. They hadn't been treated that way. They wrote home to their families wrote back up to the Board of Trustees. Board of Trustees turned against Turner. The community turned against Turner. Finally, he's accused of mismanagement. Well, and guess what happens? There's a fire. 1867, there was a huge fire, and you see the north wing is basically destroyed. And if that's not bad enough, Turner's accused of starting a fire, and he's forced to resign. Ended up going back to New England, where he was originally from, and spent the rest of his life trying to get his castle back. Next, a man by the name of Dr. Albert Day is installed as the director. Well, Day was a polar opposite of Edward Turner. He was an easygoing guy, very nice, very friendly. And that caused its own set of problems. Here's an advertisement in Harper's Weekly, or a big article in Harper's Weekly. It shows typical life in the Inebriate Asylum. And look, here's a gymnasium, bowling alley. There's a patient playing violin in his room. Nice big reading room, billiard room. Chapel is just magnificent. Even had antiphonal balconies on either side. So now the Inebriate Asylum is perceived as a resort for wealthy downstate alcoholics. And I mentioned anywhere in town, you look up and you see that grand structure. Well, now you see a grand structure that's full of wealthy inebriates. And people resented that. So guess what? There's another fire. This was in 1870, and this time Day is accused of starting the fire, and he's forced to resign. Oh, remember I warned you about those dogs? All right. At its peak in 1872, the Inebriate Asylum was treating 334 patients, but by 1878, the population had dropped to 39. And so this happened. 1879, the governor declared the whole experiment, Inebriate Asylum experiment, a complete failure. He recommended converting the facility to an asylum for the chronic insane. That was not completely unexpected. The state was in desperate need of more space for mentally ill patients, and they were always looking for more space. And in fact, while the building was being built, Turner sent a letter to the governor-elect at that time. And because I suspect because he was trying to get the money. And he made this statement. He said, if the day should ever arrive when this institution isn't any longer needed for the restraint of medical treatment of the inebriate, then the state could only spend $1,000 and turn it into an insane asylum. Well, that's exactly what happened, although it took a little more than $1,000. Okay. Binghamton Asylum for the Chronic Insane.
Muted now.
Renovation started in 1880 to convert it to a mental asylum, and Isaac Perry was contracted to do the design and supervise the renovation. Okay, and here's what they did. First of all, they split it into male and female wards. So the male wards were on the north side, female on the south. The center part is what they call the transept, and that's where business offices were. And on the upper floors, the chapel was there. Installed new stairwells, established nice big day rooms down at either end. But the big change was this: they added what were called wash towers to the back of each of the two wards, each of the two wings. That's where bathing, people would bathe. That's where the toilets were. Theodore Armstrong was installed as the first director of the asylum, and we also have his diary. Here it is, October 19th. First patient brought to Binghamton Asylum for the Chronic Insane from the Ulster County Poor Farm. And that's basically before asylums were around. That's where the mentally ill were housed, was in poor farms. And here's a couple entries from his diary. First patient brought in on October 19th. October 28th, 3 more patients brought from Greene and Broome counties. October 31st, patients all quiet. November 8th, Philip died this morning. December 26th, Mrs. M raving. She broke 10 panes of glass. And January 12th, cows are giving about 29 quarts of milk per day. So this director, he was more than just a medical doctor. He was running farms. He was doing everything it took to run this community. This is interesting. January 15th, cows looking very well, patients very disturbed. Soon after opening, 298 patients were transferred from Utica, Willard, and other New York State asylums. And then in 1890, it was renamed Binghamton State Hospital. And you can see how it grew over the years. This is a map. That highlighted thing is the main building or the castle. And you can see all of these other buildings added. Huge extension to the back of the castle with wings on that. Assembly Hall, North Building, East Building, cow barns. So you can see all of this stuff was added because it was a community all to itself. There were farms, there were greenhouses, piggeries, henneries. And so it was just like a city all to itself. There's some of the other buildings. East Hall, designed by Isaac Perry, is later demolished. North Hall. This is Broadmoor, built in 1907, and although it's abandoned, it is still standing. This is the Assembly Hall, another Isaac Perry design. And that was just magnificent. Unfortunately, it has also been demolished. South Hall, Fairmount, both of those are gone. And this is looking at the back of the castle. This is that extension that I was just talking about, and the wings coming out from that. All of that has been since demolished. Wagner Hall is the female version of Broadmoor. Broadmoor was male, Wagner was female. Greenhouse. There were a few dairy barns. Dairy barn 6 is still standing, used for storage, and as I understand it, Perry even designed that. The old Parkhurst dairy barn and farmhouse. This was the original power plant. It was later demolished and replaced by another power plant, which is also no longer in use. And Pine Camp Cottages down. Let's see, if you go down by 84 Lumber, Frito-Lay, and take a left right across the bridge, that'll take you back to what they called Pine Camp. And those are cottages where both staff and patients used to go to camp. By the 50s, patient population had peaked at well over 3,000, and every square space in the buildings was being used for patients. Then in 1954, those turrets were removed. These beautiful, magnificent turrets on the top of the building. There was some concern that they might start crumbling and they might be a hazard, so they were removed. And that's what it looks like today. And I'll just back up once. That's quite a drastic change. And here they are actually being taken down. Okay, since the 1960s, new methods of treatment were happening, and a trend to deinstitutionalize patients brought a rapid decline in patient population. 1970s, patients were relocated from the castle, and it was used only for staff offices. Other buildings fell into disrepair, and many were eventually demolished. There's an interesting photo. It looks like a drawing, but it's an actual photo with snow on the ground taken in 1957. And you can see all of the buildings that were on that campus. That's the castle. Every one of those red X's is a building that no longer is. All of those have been demolished. And let's see, the one that's, there's a couple left back here that are in serious danger of demolition by neglect. And one more thing, in 1993, the castle finally closed because a portion of the facade collapsed. And that little area right there used to have nice stonework on the top. That all collapsed. This is actually plywood that you see. And you can see how the stonework actually damaged the stones down below. Been closed ever since 1993. Everybody left, and nobody has ever gone back in. The good thing is all that stonework was saved. So when the building is renovated, that stonework on the facade can actually be rebuilt, and the stonework down below. So just to recap here, that's the original appearance. This is the appearance after the turrets were removed. And this is after the facade collapsed. Even still, it's a pretty good looking building. Let me show you a timeline here. Construction began in 1858. It finally opens in 1864 as an inebriate asylum. Closes 1879, reopens 2 years later as a state hospital, renamed again to Binghamton Psych Center, and finally the building is closed in 1993. campus is still active, but the castle itself is closed. And here's interesting numbers. The patient population peaked in 1872 as an inebriate asylum with 334. The campus population peaked in 1950, I guess it was probably 1958, but well over 3,000 patients. Now, a lot of you probably know I do a 100 years ago feature on Facebook. And a couple days ago, as a matter of fact, I was looking at the newspaper from 100 years ago. And it said that, okay, the state hospital now has 2,800 patients and 500 staff. So it works out to about just under 6 patients per staff member. Okay, ever since 1993, it's been vacant. So what has happened since? In 1996, it was listed on the National Register of Historic Places, and Preservation Association of the Southern Tier is responsible for doing that, which is no easy task, by the way. It is one of several sites in Broome County that is listed on the National Register. It is not one of several that's designated a National Historic Landmark. 1997 passed, got it designated as such. And that is something this county should be very proud of. There are no other National Historic Landmark sites in the county. The closest building that's a National Historic Landmark is on Cornell's campus in Ithaca. 1998, I guess it officially went up for sale. 1999, it was identified as one of New York State's most endangered historic landmarks. So today, 28 years after closing, the building remains empty. So let's take a little walk through. Got quite a few photos here. I'll step through them kind of quick. This window up, you're looking at the back of the building. And by the way, if you notice, the stonework on the back is different quality stone than the stone on the front. Stone on the front was quarried up near Syracuse, a very high grade stone. The stone on the back was less expensive and quarried more locally. But anyway, this round window up at the top, I mentioned that the Masons played an important role. Well, there's the Masonic all-seeing eye right in the center of that window. This is the old bell that was at one of the towers. It was removed when the turrets were removed, towers were removed. And it used to sound curfew for the patients when it was an inebriate asylum. Go in the main entrance. That's the first thing you see when you walk in the front doors. This magnificent dual staircase. I mentioned that was Perry's forte. And this is, I've seen a lot of his staircases, and this is the nicest one I've ever seen. There's two things that are hidden on two of the newel posts there. And it's little hand-carved acorns. And some people say that that was Perry's signature trademark. Don't know if that's true or not, but acorns do show up on a lot of his work. One of the former employees that I talked to was a housekeeper there. And she told me every morning when she came into work, she would go over and she'd rub that acorn for good luck. This is one of the main rooms there in the transept. And these were used for doctors' offices, for reception rooms for new patients. And you probably noticed what good condition everything is in, relatively speaking. The woodwork, everything. You know, you'll see in some of these pictures, you'll see some peeling paint. But other than that, it is not only structurally, but cosmetically, it's in excellent condition throughout the building. This is interesting. This is one of those offices. And a couple of years ago, a promotional film was being done by the Office of Addiction Services. And they thought, well, heck, since this building is where that started, why not do some filming there? So they came in, we got a bunch of vintage items, put them on the desk there. And that I include the picture here because that gives you an idea of what it would have looked like back when it was running. And there's his office, the director's office. Yeah, it's just amazing that it's in this good a condition after all this time. And having sat empty since 1993. And there's a reason for that. The reason is the Office of Mental Health, Greater Binghamton Health Center, has kept the heat on and has performed ongoing maintenance. Best way to destroy a building is to turn the heat off and let it sit for 28 years. Well, there's a cost associated with it, obviously, but they kept the heat on. Okay, walk down a couple of the wards here. There's a little peeling paint. Okay, I can't go past this slide without telling the story of the man that used to sit in an easy chair right here. He was a patient and they had an easy chair right here against the wall and he would sit here. And all day long, he would shuffle his feet. And he did it so much that he wore grooves in the floor. The attendant on that ward is the man that told me that story. Skylights. Now you're up on the top floor, and the idea was to have skylights, a lot of windows, because that was considered therapeutic. This is down on the ground. You know, some people say it's three stories. Some people say it's four. This is the ground floor, which is really considered kind of a basement, kind of a half basement, and then there's a basement below that. And this was originally a dining area and kitchen. Okay, I mentioned the wash towers. That's what they look like on the outside. When Perry first had them built, they had castellated stonework along the top, and they were even colored to blend in more with the castle. And this is one of the rooms in the wash tower. Nice inlaid tile. Okay, the rooms above the entrance were originally a library. And there are some just beautiful stained glass windows in there. And that's the old library. Going on up to the next level, that's where the chapel and later museum is located. This was, well, you saw the original lithograph, beautiful chapel for the Inebriate Asylum. Later, it was wall-to-wall beds for patients when it was so overcrowded. Okay, at one point, in fact, it was 1981, which was the 100-year anniversary of it opening as a state hospital. They decided to turn the chapel into a museum. So people were sent all around the campus to gather up artifacts. And so there's photographs, furniture, portraits, all sorts of neat artifacts, medical instruments, all sorts of artifacts. And then it was a museum and people could come in and look at it all. Now, again, all of that stuff has been removed. In 2012, crews took everything out of that area, out of the whole building. And all of it has since been cataloged, documented, and protected, stored in a climate-controlled environment. Like I said, they had even some medical instruments in there on display. You may have heard of this. One of the incredible finds we made when we were clearing that stuff out was a treasure trove of glass plate negatives. These glass plate negatives were photographs taken 100 years ago of life on the state hospital campus. So there are photos of buildings that are no longer there, of staff, and of patients. A total of, oh gosh, over 5,000 negatives by the time we were done. And some of them had multiple images on the glass plate. So there were over 7,000 images. Most of those are of former patients. And I got to tell you, all of that would have ended up in a dumpster because when they were found, they were buried below just piles of trash. And we had heard that they existed and I'd looked for them for many times, never was able to find them. but this time we were able to find them. But yeah, they were almost lost. And here's what it looked, what they look like. This is one of the larger ones. I think it measures 8 by 10. And here I'm just holding the glass plate up to a window to backlight it, and with a camera taking a picture of it. And then what the photographer would do is take this into his dark room. He would print it as a positive on photo paper. Well, you can do that in Photoshop now and turn it positive. So this is what the end product would have looked like. Like I said, there's a lot of pictures of staff. Patients. And again, everything was taken out. This was in 2012. By the way, all those glass plate negatives, we set up a whole process where they would be, first they would be cleaned, then they would be scanned at very high resolution. So we have digitized versions of all of these things now. Then the glass plate itself would be stored in museum quality archival folders. Okay, there's an attic. There are actually 3 attics. And I'm including these, well, because they're interesting, but also they show, again, no serious damage, no leaks. Of course, the other reason is nobody's ever been up there, so it's a chance to see something that's really neat. Now, if you climb up and go through that little hatch there, you're up over the dome of the chapel. That wood is just enormous. Wood pegs. And the roof's in good condition. Down in the sub basement, came across some 1928 graffiti. By the way, you hear all sorts of horror stories about what went on in the building, and you know, the shackles and chains that are down in the basement. Well, I can tell you there's none of that. There's no evidence of any of that. All right, let's say something about demolition by neglect. And point is, things could have been a lot worse. Preservationists like to use this kind of buzzword, demolition by neglect, and you know what it means is if you neglect a building long enough, it'll just cave in and demolish itself. And there's evidence of that on the campus. So let me show you a comparison here. This is Broadmoor Hall. It was built in 1907. That's what? That's, gosh, 50 years, almost 50 years after the castle was started. Well, let's take a walk inside that, and I can tell you that in this building, the heat was not kept on. Everything was exposed to the elements. So you get an idea, this is what the castle could have looked like if the Office of Mental Health had not kept the maintenance and the heat going. Okay, we're almost done here. A few recent developments. In 2006, there was some interest by a Buffalo developer. He had done something very similar in Buffalo and turned a building that looked very similar to our castle into an affordable senior housing facility. In fact, that's what it looks like. That is not our castle. That's this place in Buffalo. It was a great success. Well, we sent him the information on the castle, a whole package. He got interested. He loaded up his team, gosh, probably, I don't know, a couple dozen people onto a chartered bus, drove over here from Buffalo. They went through the castle, and they were very, very interested in it. And about the same time, Upstate Medical University took a major interest in it. And they made an announcement that they would open up their clinical camp. They already had a presence of the clinical campus on the health center campus, but they would use the castle for their clinical campus and education center. So of the two, I guess the Upstate Medical initiative was more attractive than the affordable senior housing. I'm not sure that was the way to go, but as it turns out, neither one of them happened. Well, I'll tell you what happened with Upstate Medical. Money was allocated by the state, almost $12.5 million to start phase one of the renovation. But at that time, in 2008, the state was going through some serious financial troubles. And although the money was allocated, it was frozen. So the idea was wait till it's not frozen and then start up again with the Upstate Medical project. It wasn't going to happen. It was 4 years before conditions improved enough to release the freeze on the funding. And by that time, that was 2012. Things had changed. The key player at Upstate Medical University was no longer there, and the university was just not that interested in doing what they had planned to do back in 4 years earlier. So we lost an opportunity. We lost two opportunities. 2015, Binghamton University announced that they were interested and they would like to assume stewardship and develop a plan for reuse of the building. Now, we're not sure what assumed stewardship really means, but it all kind of hinges on how it would be reused. There are a lot of ideas were tossed around, but even as of right now, I guess there's still no decision on how it should best be reused. In 2016, that original $12.45 million was made available to Binghamton University to start the renovation. And that kicked off a building study the following year that went on for several months. Engineers went through with a fine-tooth comb to figure out what needs to be done to renovate this building and roughly what is it going to cost, and then ranked in priorities. Okay, this needs to be done first, this second, this third. That building study is done. And then the next step was to do a feasibility study. And that is what was in progress when the pandemic came along. So the feasibility study was launched, the first meeting actually happened, but then for the last year and a half, everything has been on pretty much on hold. Hopefully, now that things are starting to get back to normal, and there's no reason to believe that it won't happen. hopefully it'll get back on course and we'll be moving ahead. We are not the only community in upstate New York that has a historic asylum. And if you're wondering what other people have done with theirs, well, I'm going to show you. Utica, the very first asylum was built in 1843 in Utica. First asylum for treatment of mental illness. I went through that a few years ago, and it was in much worse condition than our castle is. But it has been and is continuing to be renovated as a museum and a medical record storage facility. So that's what one of the rooms on the first floor looks like today. So they've taken their historic asylum, much worse condition than ours, and they're actually turning it into a showplace. Willard, this one was built in 1864. It was the first New York State asylum for the chronic insane. And again, those buildings were in much worse condition than the castle. And what's happened there is a lot of the buildings have been renovated and are being used today. It's an active campus. Some of the buildings are still going to be demolished or are in very rough condition. But the point is, a lot of the buildings have been renovated, and it's just an active campus today.
Where is
Buffalo, built in 1872. This is one of the most famous. It's an H.H. Richardson designed facility in Buffalo, and it's one of the most famous in the state. Magnificent. But talk about worse condition. It's not only worse, I've been through a lot of abandoned buildings, and this is absolutely the most dangerous I've been in. There are places where the floor was spongy, and if you took another step, you'd fall right through to the floor below. But look what they did. It was ownership was assumed by a not-for-profit organization. They came up with a plan to develop it into a resort, an urban resort and conference center. They partnered with a hotel organization to lease the property and run it as an 88-room resort center. It's an amazing success. And it took many years. They started this actually, oh gosh, I don't know, probably 2008, maybe earlier than that. But anyway, it was amazing success. And the only problem is, I've got some bad news. Well, the other good news is in 2018, it was named by Time magazine as one of the world's greatest places. But pandemic came along, and just this last February, they came out with an announcement that the hotel was ending business operations due to crippling pandemic environment. Now, news in Buffalo is still, there's a lot of news about this building and still going on in Buffalo. There's another group that is talking about taking it over and running it just the same way it was as a resort. But there's no decision has been made yet. And now that the pandemic is hopefully fading away, I think this will come back to life. But again, it was from a preservation standpoint, it was an absolute amazing success story. Okay, and then ours was built in 1858. It was the very first inebriate asylum in the country. So historically, it's right up there with the best of them. It's in excellent condition as far as I'm concerned. But the future is uncertain. Okay, and one final thing, I want to say something about the people here. I mentioned that I've talked to a lot of former employees and even former patients, and they all have just wonderful, wonderful stories about the facility. And they all say the same thing. They say that it was a big community. It was like a city all to itself, but it was like a big community, that the employees were like a big family. Everybody pulled together. They looked out for each other. The nurses, the attendants, they all had a great love and respect for the people that they cared for. You know, with the pandemic going on, I have said this before, you know, you drive around and you see health centers and nursing homes and whatnot, and there's always a sign out front that says heroes work here. Well, I know for a fact heroes worked here at the castle. They have worked there for over 100 years, and they're still working today on that campus. Okay, enough said about the staff. The patients that were there, people that for whatever reason were sent to live there. Many would never leave. Each one had a family, each one had a story. And I think it's important that we think of them with the dignity and the respect that they deserve. Which brings me to this. We looked at this map right at the beginning, showing all the buildings and the fact that it was a city all to itself. Well, up there in the corner, you'll see that there was a cemetery. That cemetery was for patients who had no family to take care of them when they died, or to take care of their burial when they died. Well, from 1890, when the first patient was buried there, until 1971, 4,009 patients were buried in the State Hospital Cemetery. And then this happened. 1961, the Penn Can Highway was built, cut right through the cemetery. That's now known as I-81 or I-86 or even Route 17. 1961, that went right through the cemetery. The powers that be contracted a firm to relocate over 1,500 graves to another site on the campus that's nearby. This is what the cemeteries looked like. This is in the old original portion that was not disturbed by the highway. There's a variety of markers that they used over the years. Each marker has a number, and it's just a sequential number. If patient number, what is that, 3058 died, the next person that was buried would be 3059. So they were just numbered in sequence as they died, or as they were buried. Now, there's a master chart that shows where each number is buried and what name that corresponds to. So every grave can be located. This is the new portion. This is where the 1,500 plus graves were relocated in 1961, and that's where burials continued to happen between 1961 and 1971. Looks like an empty field. When this cemetery was moved to this location, they changed the style of marker, and now the marker would be a block of marble or granite, and it was probably, I don't know, 1.5 feet high, maybe 4 inches square, 5 inches square. And then on the very top would be the number would be engraved. Well, they were buried with each burial, and the idea was that the number would be visible from ground level, and then a mower could go over and not disturb it. Well, the stones sunk over the years, so now pretty much all the stones are probably anywhere from 3 to 5 inches below the surface. They're all there, but they can't be seen. The good thing is that all of those graves were buried to a very strict grid. So it's very easy to locate an individual grave from that grid. And here's some exciting news that you'll hear here first. For years, we, meaning past, has been working with the state hospital to try to get a marker on the cemetery to point out the fact that people are buried there. Nobody knows that they're buried there. Nobody knows that the cemeteries are there. And in fact, the property is posted no trespassing. Well, we finally got the approval of the powers to be at the state hospital. And that is what the marker will look like. And hopefully we can get that installed sometime this year before the snow flies. That's the plan. And I think that's a remarkable achievement by past, by the way. So that is the presentation. I want to say a couple thank yous before I go here. First of all, to the Greater Binghamton Health Center and the New York State Office of Mental Health for a couple things, for keeping the heat on and protecting this National Historic Landmark, but also for their trust in allowing me to research, photograph, and document the history of this building. We've built a nice, mutually trustful relationship, and I appreciate that. Thank you to the Broome County Historical Society for maintaining its amazing collection of priceless historical documents. And by the way, I didn't tell you how those came about. A few years ago, several years ago, the Historical Society got a phone call from a realtor in New England. The realtor was cleaning out a garage, came across these cabinets just loaded with documents, and digging into them, she noticed that it said Broome County. So she contacted the Broome County Historical Society. And so we sent a car out there, or a truck out there, and got them right away. And it is an amazing treasure trove. I mean, Joseph Edward Turner's original handwritten documents, it's just priceless. And all of that stuff could have gone into the dumpster very easily if it hadn't been for this alert realtor. So thank you to the Historical Society for doing that and for maintaining it. To the Preservation Association of Southern Tier for its 30-year ongoing effort to keep the fate of this building and the importance of its preservation in the public eye. Keeping buildings in the public eye is what saves buildings. There's no two ways about it. Preservation Association of the Southern Tier has been doing that relentlessly for the last 30 years. To Assemblywoman Donna Lapardo for all she has done and continues to do to promote the preservation of this landmark. She's been working on this for at least the last 17 years that I know of. Finally, to all the state hospital employees, patients, and their families that have shared their stories. Okay, I want to give you one reminder here. There is no access to the building at this time. Again, it's because the health center is an active campus and they're concerned with patient privacy. Also, because of safety, it is a hazardous environment. And thirdly, to protect the building. Okay. I think that's all I've got here. Whoops. That is all I've got. So thank you. Thank you for joining me, and I hope you enjoyed this this talk. If anybody has any questions, I suppose you're welcome to unmute and ask away.
I have a question.
Yeah.
You said that there was a time capsule. You showed us like the ceremony of burying the time capsule in the cornerstone. I'm wondering, is that still there or has that been opened?
Yeah, it's like we rehearsed this. You know, I had planned to show a couple more slides about the time capsule, and that's what you just saw a glimpse of a second ago. No, it's a great mystery, and the thing is, there have been several searches for that time capsule over the years. The first one is, I think, in the 1950s. There were these great studies of books or extensive research trying to locate the time capsule. Well, Masonic tradition or convention is that usually, not always, but often the northeast corner of the building is where the cornerstone is put. And I've looked at this drawing very carefully and the hills behind it and whatnot. And it sure looks to me like you're standing back here looking at the northeast corner of the building. So it makes sense that that would be the northeast corner. The problem is there's nothing about that stone in the northeast corner that would indicate that it's a cornerstone. There's no engraving, there's no marking. Even still, I suspect that's where the time capsule went, because that shows him actually putting it there. Now, what happened to it? I have a theory. First of all, none of the other cornerstones in the building can have any indication that there was it was a cornerstone either. But if you go to the inside of the building, down in the basement, right behind where that cornerstone would have been, you can see that bricks have been removed. And I think that at some point back, sometime before the 1950s, somebody wanted to get the time capsule out for some event and removed it. One of the reasons that I think that is the Carnegie Library was just renovated here in town in Binghamton. And there was a strong desire to get the time capsule out of that cornerstone. That's exactly how they did it. They went inside the Carnegie Library. They went to the inside corner where that cornerstone was. They did exactly what you see here, moved the time capsule and didn't disturb the cornerstone itself. So that's my theory, and I'm sticking with it, but I could be all wrong. So does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Well, if there's no more questions, I want to thank everybody for coming. This has been a lot of fun, and enjoy your evening. Thank you.
Roger.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you very much for this wonderful presentation and for your dedication to this building and also to the history of Broome County.
Oh, thank you so much, Laura.
Immensely informative and just great.
I'm so glad you could make it.
Thank you. So let's sign off now, and thanks for participating. I hope you can participate the next time in Path Through History as well, if able. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to shut us down here. Thanks again.